Good afternoon and welcome back to Lunch Break with the Rabbi after a long hiatus over the Passover holiday. We're back up and running, and God willing, we'll keep to our Monday through Thursday, 1 p.m. Lunch Break with the Rabbi. Just want to remind you that we're also starting a new series on our JLI course starting April 27th. It's called It Can't Happen, talking about the time of the Messianic era, the utopia of the world, and peace, tranquility can usher in an unbelievable era. You can see more information about that on our website, jewishally.com, for our new course, which will be starting again April 27th in person and a Zoom option as well. As we are now coming off the holiday of Passover, we're still in the month of Nisan, a month of miracles, a month where we still continue to celebrate the holiday of Passover. But interestingly enough, the Torah reading that we read this week is a Torah reading that we haven't yet read it in the actual Torah, but it was done for last week and this week as well. And the name of the Torah reading is Shemini, which literally translates to the number 8. And what we find in this Torah reading is after Moshe prepares Aaron and his sons, and they get ready to serve in the Holy Temple, Moses now acts as the high priest, and he has his children, the children of Aaron, and Aaron act as the regular priests, as the Kohanim, and they watch and observe what has to be done with every detail of the sacrifices and so on and so forth. Finally, on the 8th day, when he anoints them and they now take over, the Jewish people see this unbelievable divine presence in front of their eyes. The amount of holiness that they've seen at the time is just expressed by the fact that the Torah tells us that a fire came out of heaven, and all the Jews standing there just fell to their faces and bowed in front of God. That means there was an awesome level of spirituality. They experienced physically a level of spirituality which we can't even fathom. To the extent that Aaron's 2 sons, we speak about their tragic passing, but that was because of their desire to cleave to God on the highest level imaginable. And because of that, according to some, they went into the Holy of Holies. They've brought sacrifices when they weren't allowed, but their desire to be completely and absolute holiness. So if you can imagine, that's the way it was by Aaron and his sons. And it talks about the utopia of spirituality that it was the time. The level of spirituality that they were able to realize, not only realize and understand, but feel, touch, and see was unfathomable. But then as we continue reading in the Torah tells us this week about the laws of kosher and non-kosher. And within the laws of kosher and non-kosher, we know it tells us the animals, which are chew its cuts and have split hooves. Those are the kosher signs of an animal. Then the Torah goes on to tell us the kosher signs of a fish, fins and scales. Then it tells us the non-kosher birds that one should not eat. And with all of these different levels of why we have kosher or non-kosher, there is no rhyme or reason why the Torah picks this to be kosher. The Torah clearly says that the reasons for kosher were only because God said, I took you out of Egypt and I want you to be different, segregated, holy, and therefore I want you to keep these laws. But then the Torah goes a step further and tells us about the concept, the prohibition of eating bugs. Now, if you've ever noticed in a kosher kitchen, before they cut up a salad, they'll take a lettuce, hold it up to a light, or hold it up to see if there's any crawling bugs maybe on it, whether it's a broccoli, a cauliflower, they'll soak in wood, or different methods to be able to remove any type of insect that may be on it. And if a vegetable or fruit is very heavily infested, a kosher kitchen will not allow such a food and not eat that food. Just to give you a little example, sometimes raspberries are heavily infested, or other types of fruits that may have a lot of bugs, which are almost impossible to get rid of. We don't eat that because of the prohibition of this week's Torah reading that says that any type of bug, creeping or crawling type of bug, is prohibited for the Jewish people to consume. Now, it's interesting that in the same Torah reading that tells us about the highest level of spirituality that the Jews can attain, to the effect that they saw it in front of their eyes, they visualized the fire of God, the divine presence in front of them. They were able to ascend to a level of absolute holiness that it permeated and generated and transformed their entire being. The same exact Torah reading tells us about the prohibition of eating bugs. Not only that, the name of the Torah reading is Shmini, which is 8, as we discussed many times. The number of 8 is above and beyond comprehension, shows an infinite connection. How is it that this same exact Torah reading, which defines and depicts the absolute spirituality of the Jewish people, also tells us about the prohibition of eating bugs, which seemingly every human person who is disgusted, who would eat a bug? People don't like bugs. Even human beings, and without the laws of kosher, don't want to have bugs. That's why they spray pesticides and the things of the nature. How is it that we take the greatest spiritual level and put it right next to and juxtapose it to right next to something which talks about even every human being who has no spirituality in them will self-understand and not to have it? And over here comes the unbelievable lesson that the Torah is teaching us. The concept of commitment, subservience. At times we may think that we've reached an intellectual pinnacle, that we understand, we appreciate, we've reached to a level of spirituality, and I on my own can decide what is spiritual, what is not spiritual, what is beneficial, what is not beneficial, what gives me a spiritual ecstasy, what makes me excited, why I should appreciate spirituality, why I should not. And each one of these things may have different interpretations or different expressions of what they actually mean or affect in the life we look at it. And over here, the Torah comes along and tells me, as great as you may be, you may have experienced the greatest spiritual ecstasy you can ever imagine. You've seen spirituality, you've reached a divine level that you see you're connected to the holiest levels. But you got to remember, why do you follow what God told you to do? Not because you intellectually or spiritually feel it. It's because God told you to do it. When we follow God's commandments, not because it makes us feel good. Of course, it will make us feel good. But that's not the reason why we do it. Not spiritually, not physically. Only because God told us to do it. Step number 1 is commitment, subservience. Recognizing that I am connected and committed to what God tells me to do, whatever it feels like and whatever it may sound like. Regardless of what level I'm at, whatever level I reach, I always know that there's more for me to learn, more for me to experience, and more for me to educate myself and the people around me. What the Torah is telling us in the number Shemini, number 8, that the ultimate foundation of any relationship is a commitment. But a commitment that's not based on intellect, a commitment that's not based on how I feel, but a commitment that's out of subservience. When you have a commitment to a relationship with God, and so to a relationship with your fellow man, whether it's your spouse or your children, that commitment which is unshakable regardless of what intellect tells you or what you feel and when you act, that is the core of a relationship. And only then will the relationship grow and continue to experience and cultivate until a full-blown appreciation and relationship between the two, whether it's between us and God or between you and your spouse, your children, maybe. Over here, God is teaching us in the Torah reading of Shemini. Yes, he tells us about the prohibition of bugs, which may be disgusting, right next to the greatest spiritual ecstasy the Jews ever felt. To tell us it's about commitment. When you have that commitment, the relationship will explode and you'll enjoy it forever. Thank you for tuning in today. Join us again tomorrow, lunch break with the Rabbi at 1 p.m. Looking forward to speaking to you soon. All the best. Have a wonderful day.